Henry VIII is most famously known for his 6 wives and his love life, which was nothing short of a disaster. The king would even execute 2 of his wives inside the Tower of London. But one woman who was considered the most fortunate of the Tudor monarch's wives was Anne of Cleves. After her annulment with the king and the short-lived marriage, Anne was awarded a large amount of property, and she was able to live a life very comfortable, but most importantly, escape with her life. She was not executed, but instead, around the age of 41, she died inside of Chelsea Manor, and she outlived the rest of Henry's wives. But what is the story of the death of Henry VIII's 4th wife? Now, Henry VIII ultimately, following the death of Jane Seymour, dispatched Hans Holbein to paint a picture of the number of women that he would possibly take as his 4th wife. Holbein was tasked with making the image as accurate as possible, and he arrived at Durham to make portraits of Anne and her younger sister Amalia, who were being considered to marry the English king. Henry chose Anne, and by March of 1539 marriage negotiations were occurring. Thomas Cromwell, the king's chief adviser, was tasked with overseeing the talks and a marriage treaty was signed in the following October. The king then paid a dowry of 100,000 florins to Anne's brother, but Anne of Cleves was not Henry's normal type. He was a man who valued culture and education, but Anne did not necessarily have this. Despite her standing, she was not the best educated. She was skilled in needlework, and she played card games in her spare time. She could only read and write in German, but she was a gentle and calm woman, which is why she was considered a good wife for Henry. The French ambassador stated she was tall and slim, and of middling beauty, and a very assured and resolute countenance. Anne was fair-haired and allegedly did have a nice face, and a chronicler stated her hair hanging down, which was fair yellow and long. She was apparelled after the English fashion, with a French hood, which so set forth her beauty and good visage, that every creature rejoiced to behold her. But to some she looked older than her age, and on New Year's Day, 1540, Henry VIII met with her privately. He followed the Tudor courtly love tradition, and he entered a room in disguise where Anne was staying. Eustace Chapuis, the imperial ambassador, then said, Henry so went up into the chamber where the said Lady Anne was looking out of a window to see the bull-baiting which was going on in the courtyard, and suddenly he embraced and kissed her, and showed her a token which the king had sent for her from New Year's gift. And she, being abashed and not knowing who it was, thanked him, and so he spoke with her. But she regarded him little, but always looked out of the window. And when the king saw that she took so little notice of his coming, he went into another chamber and took off his cloak, and then came in again in a coat of purple velvet. And when the lords and knights saw his grace, they did him reverence. The meeting was a disaster, and Anne did not know that he was the king. Henry in return was greatly disappointed with Anne of Cleves. He felt like he had been ultimately catfished, and she was not what he had seen in the Holbein image. Anne did not know him as a king in these initial meetings, and when Henry revealed who he was to his future wife, he was said to have been put off the marriage. Anne and Henry then met officially on the 3rd of January at Blackheath near Greenwich Park, and a huge reception then took place. It's believed that Henry was now bowled over by Anne of Cleves' looks, and that this led him to feel uninspired to consummate the marriage. He believed he had been misled by Cromwell, and he said, "She is nothing so fair as she hath been reported," and he continued to complain to Cromwell and others about his 4th wife-to-be. Because of this, Henry VIII tasked Cromwell to get himself a legal way out of another marriage, and it was clear, unlike Anne Boleyn, he could not behead this one. Cromwell could not get the king out of it, and because of this he had to marry Anne of Cleves on the 6th of January 1540 at the Palace of Placentia in Greenwich. The couple's first night did not go well and was not successful, and the marriage was left unconsummated. The following month Anne praised her husband, saying, "When he comes to bed he kisseth me, and he taketh me by the hand, and biddeth me good night, sweetheart, and in the morning kisseth me, and biddeth me farewell, darling." But Anne was then told to leave the royal court on the 24th of June, around 6 months after the marriage, and she was then told that Henry was reconsidering the marriage. There were many witnesses stating that the king had not been able to consummate the marriage, and because of this, consent was given to annul the marriage, and Anne agreed with this. This also led to the downfall and execution of Thomas Cromwell, but the annulment went through on the 12th of July 1540. Following the annulment, Anne of Cleves was given a rather large amount of manors and properties, including Hever Castle, the former home of the Boleyns. Anne and Henry became good friends, and she was considered the king's beloved sister, and she often came to court, and Henry valued her company. Following Catherine Howard's execution, there were calls for Henry to remarry Anne, but she did not like the king's final wife, Catherine Parr. In the following years she remained living very comfortably, and during Mary I's reign she congratulated the Queen on her marriage to Philip of Spain. She also took part in the Queen's coronation, and these were her last public appearances. She did lose favour during the Wyatt's rebellion, as Anne's closest association with Princess Elizabeth attracted criticism, and some believed that she was also involved in the plotting. She was then forced to live a quiet life on her estates, but she would never leave England, and she was rather homesick. However, Anne, by July of 1557, had been ill for some time. She was ill for a few months, and she was bedridden, and also drafted her will. She stated that money should be left to her household, including her ladies, grooms, and gentlemen of the house. She listed every member of her household by name, and asked for the Queen to make sure they were comfortable after her death. She gave her jewellery to her family, but also left rings and jewels to her stepdaughters, Mary I and the future Elizabeth I. She was living in Chelsea Manor, and she died on the 16th of July 1557. It's believed that she died from cancer, but after this she was given a large funeral depicting the fact she was briefly the Queen of England. It was said, "On the 3rd day of August, my Lady Anne of Cleves, sometime wife to Henry VIII, came from Chelsea to be buried in Westminster, with all the children of Westminster, and many priests and clerks, and the monks of Westminster, and my Lord Bishop of London, and my Lord Abbot of Westminster rode together. Many of the prominent politicians of the time attended, and there were 100 torches burning, being carried by her servants. The procession was huge and large, and she was then taken into Westminster Abbey. Her coffin was then taken to her tomb, and was interred with cloth of gold laid over her. Following this, the officers of her household broke their staves of office and threw them into the tomb." Anne of Cleves was the wife of King Henry VIII, who gained a significant amount of land and wealth following her failed marriage to the Tudor monarch. As mentioned, she is considered very lucky, as she escaped with her head. And there was little brutal scandal surrounding her, only the fact the king could not consummate his marriage with her. Today her tomb has been obscured by other monuments, showing that in the canon of history she was rather insignificant, but she was a woman who was a princess and also a queen. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.